Greetings, I'm Dr. Doug Campbell, and I suppose we all have our favorite holiday traditions, whether it is Christmas tree, nice festive hat, got some cookies out for Santa, and of course, some eggnog with a nice generous slug of booze. Indeed, in terms of traditions, it doesn't seem like Christmas to me until I've watched Hans Gruber fall from Nakatomi Tower.
Now I have a machine gun. Ho, ho, ho.
So, we all have our own way of celebrating, but there are some folks who argue that all of these trappings distract us from what Christmas was really supposed to be about, a solemn religious holiday, a period of deep spiritual renewal that we have gotten away from the true meaning of Christmas. Is this really true? Or to put it another way, is Christmas B.S? Let's find out. Oh, I actually put quite a bit of rum in that. Very tasty though. So to start off with, the true meaning of Christmas, and tying it to a specifically religious and indeed Christian observance, well, I think my buddy Linus from the Charlie Brown Christmas special in 1965 can phrase it better than I can.
For behold, I bring you tidings of great joy, which shall be to all people. For unto you is born this day in the city of David a Savior, which is Christ the Lord. And this shall be a sign unto you. Ye shall find the babe wrapped in swaddling clothes, lying in a manger. And suddenly there was with the angel a multitude of the heavenly host praising God, and saying, Glory to God in the highest, and on earth peace, goodwill toward men. That's what Christmas is all about, Charlie Brown.
Heartwarming though that moment from a beloved holiday special may be, it also is not really giving a complete account of the quote-unquote meaning of Christmas. Something that complicates this from the get-go is that, as far as we can tell, early Christians did not celebrate Christmas. In fact, it took them until perhaps the 3rd or even 4th century to celebrate Christmas, insofar as our sources reveal. And if that seems strange, actually it's not too terribly hard to understand why. That reading from Linus comes from the Gospel according to Luke. It is one of 2 places in the Christian New Testament where there is an account of Jesus' birth. The other is in the Gospel according to Matthew. Neither one of those nativity stories is terribly long. Both of them are actually quite different. To come up with the quote-unquote first Christmas story that you often hear bandied about on Christmas, you sort of have to smush them together and weave them into one composite narrative. But even so, among other things, they don't say anything about when Jesus was born. So early Christians didn't celebrate Jesus' birth because they didn't know when it was. As I said, we only start to get accounts of this in the 300s, and even then, the celebration of Jesus' birth was overshadowed by commemorations of Epiphany, which seems to have been a more important commemoration for early Christians for a long time than Christmas was. So if that's the case, where did all of this Christmas stuff come from? The answer is that it existed before Christianity, that the roots of much of what we recognize as modern Christmas celebrations comes from pre-Christian paganism, whether we are talking about the pagan worship of the Roman Empire, out of which Christianity also developed, or whether we are talking about pagan traditions from Northern Europe, the territory into which Christianity expanded during the early Middle Ages. And there we see pagan festivals that bear many of the trappings of what would ultimately become modern Christmas. For the Roman Empire, we have several holidays, most particularly the Festival of Saturnalia, which comes in kind of mid-December and was kind of a time of festive partying, spending time with family and friends and kind of carousing and a sort of point in the year of general goodwill. It also sort of merges in with the celebration of Calends, which is Roman New Year, so around the 1st of January, the same time as our New Year. Those two holidays were widely celebrated throughout the empire. Less common, but still certainly a cultural feature, was the celebration of the birthday of a sun god, Sol Invictus, the conquering sun, which was pegged to the 25th of December, which should sound a little bit familiar. Now, if we're talking about Northern Europe and kind of the Germanic gods, there we're talking about a midwinter holiday called Yule that was celebrated in northern Germany and the British Isles and Scandinavia. We don't know that much about the precise forms of these commemorations, but the sources that we do have seem to indicate that it was a time, once again, of merrymaking, of drinking, of animal sacrifice, as well as veneration to the ancestors. Regardless of whether we're talking about stuff like Roman Saturnalia celebrations or Nordic Yule commemorations, in all cases, we have festivities that correspond pretty closely to some of the trappings of Christmas. Greenery or evergreen boughs seem to have been a feature of all of these commemorations. Lights as well, the lighting of the Yule log in the case of Northern Europe, and just general making merry with family and friends. All of that was a part of this. And it makes sense if you think about this, because whether we're talking about Yule, Saturnalia, Christmas, what have you, it does fall around the time of the winter solstice in the Northern Hemisphere, the darkest day of the year, after which the days start getting longer and longer and longer. And it's the kind of day that you need a holiday, right? Like, it's starting to get cold. It's really dark. It's a little bleak, and you got another couple months of this crap. Like, winter is full of fearsome stuff. So it's kind of good to have a party to like raise everybody's spirits. And that's what all of these holidays did. And so once we do start to see Christmas celebration among medieval Christian communities, they pick up a lot of the trappings of these old pagan celebrations and sort of adapt to them and assimilate them. And there's a lot of sort of syncretism, which is kind of a fancy academic word for just blending of traditions. Which is not to say that like Christmas is bogus or anything, just that it adapts to the cultural environment in which it is found. So that said, portrayals of Christmas as a solemn religious holiday are somewhat overblown. And yet sometimes you do hear talking heads and pundits, particularly on the political right, like not to get too specific, but sometimes you find them on a network whose name rhymes with Box Snooze, complaining about a quote-unquote war on Christmas. That liberals and secularists and communists and atheists are trying to kill Christmas because they want to say happy holidays rather than Merry Christmas, and this war on Christmas shall not stand. Well, I mean, for the modern world, that seems to be a pretty bogus charge. If there's a war on Christmas, Christmas is definitely winning. Try to escape it in December. But historically, there was a time when there was a legitimate war on Christmas. And it was fought, surprise, surprise, by Christians. In the aftermath of the Protestant Reformation in the island of Britain, there were a group of dour Calvinists, the extreme end of the spectrum of Protestant reformers. In the English tradition, they were called Puritans, who had a very austere, indeed almost fanatical interpretation of Christianity. And they hated Christmas. because they thought it was A, too pagan, and B, too Catholic. Religious fanatics kind of ruin everything.
The mark of Satan is upon them. They must hang. Take them to the tree.
So they set about trying to get rid of it. This was especially pronounced during the English Civil War. Under the dictatorship of the Puritan leader Oliver Cromwell, his parliament in 1652 actually tried to ban, at the very least discourage, public observances of Christmas. Didn't actually work all that well, because by that point Christmas was kind of popular. Again, people like their midwinter party. But still, there was at least an attempt. And this did have the effect of chilling a lot of the Christmas commemorations in the 1600s and 1700s in Britain. And indeed, those same Puritans, those same dour religious fanatics, did also sail across the Atlantic Ocean to found settlements in New England, what would eventually become the United States, and they brought their same sort of anti-Christmas efforts there. So, in the colonies that would eventually become the United States, there wasn't a whole lot of Christmas going on for the first 100 years or so either. So if that's the case, like our modern Christmas, how do we get that from that Christian war on Christmas? Well, part of where some of these traditions come in are from elsewhere in the European tradition. Whether we're talking about German or Dutch immigrants to the American colonies who bring Christmas trees or St. Nicholas as an important cultural figure. In Britain, too, there's the royal family. Queen Victoria and her consort, Prince Albert. The House of Hanover was actually kind of a German family, so they brought a lot of German Christmas observances to England, where they became popular. Most particularly in the 19th century, though, we get Christmas back because of a couple of very influential literary works. First of all, the American poem, A Visit from St. Nicholas, more commonly known as The Night Before Christmas, which was first published anonymously in 1823. Eventually, it was attributed to a guy called Clement Clarke Moore. And on the British end of things, we also have Charles Dickens' story, A Christmas Carol, from 1843. And we tend to think of those as kind of traditional Christmas stories, but actually they end up creating a great deal of what we think of as Christmas tradition. I mean, if you think about it, they largely cast Christmas in secular terms. Both of them say relatively little about religious observance per se. They focus on a general spirit of generosity and goodwill towards all mankind. And they feature various tropes like Santa Claus and his reindeer and all of that sort of stuff. They end up reimagining Christmas in such a vivid and durably popular way that they help define what has come to be known as modern Christmas. One final element to throw into the mix of modern Christmas, however, is capitalism. By the late 1800s into the early 20th century, you have the rise of a bona fide consumer culture within the context of a capitalist system capable of commodifying almost anything, even Christmas, perhaps especially Christmas. Again, you should think about like all of the stuff that is traditionally associated with Christmas celebration, and then how much of that stuff is sold by somebody somewhere for a profit. A lot of those things come from the modern era, people trying to make a buck. The focus on gift giving, that was not initially a part of the holiday. And for the first 1,000 years or so of Christmas celebrations, gift giving was a pretty minor part of it, with very small gifts. It's only in the late 1800s that elaborate gift giving to one's family and friends starts to become a thing. People selling something. And the rest of it kind of flows from there. Christmas cards, somebody selling something. Wrapping paper, somebody selling something. Christmas tree ornaments, somebody selling something. Artificial Christmas trees, somebody selling something. Christmas lights, somebody selling something. The beloved Christmas song, Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, first made its appearance as a poem in the Montgomery Ward catalog in 1939. The Christmas classic, White Christmas, that was written for the 1942 movie Holiday Inn, So in both cases, somebody's selling something.
Cash rules everything around me. Green, get the money. Dollar, dollar bill, yo.
So the story of Christmas certainly isn't complete without an examination of modern capitalism. Recommended reading? A great deal of what I've talked about in this video comes directly from Bruce David Forbes' Christmas, A Candid History from 2007. For the Christian Christmas stories, as we mentioned before, you find those in the New Testament, the Gospels according to Luke and Matthew. Pretty short. You can read those in less than 5 minutes, actually, both of them. For something slightly more substantial, but still a pretty quick read, we mentioned Dickens' A Christmas Carol, which in addition to having, lots of feel-good Christmas stuff, is a pretty pitch-and-go story as well. If you can find a copy with Arthur Rackham's illustrations, those add a lot of ambiance to the story. And for the capitalism end of things, not by any means a short or uncomplicated read, but Karl Marx's first volume of Capital, originally published in 1867. Regardless of one's position on capitalism or socialism or what have you, I don't think that anybody has ever penned a more perceptive investigation of the way in which capitalist culture is capable of commodifying all sorts of human goods and turning them into something to make a quick buck. And besides, Marx looks a little bit like Santa Claus. So for our verdict, am I trying to say that Christmas is BS? No, come on. I want Santa Claus to visit me. I can't say that. But I think that we can say a couple of things about it. First of all, Christmas has never been just one thing, but has been many things to many people, serving a variety of different functions. So if you want to emphasize the Christian character of your Christmas celebrations, by all means, you're more than welcome. It's a completely valid way of approaching Christmas. Just I would hope that you wouldn't try to tell other people how they can or cannot celebrate Christmas, what Christmas should mean to them, or whether it should mean anything at all. Like, obviously, it's completely fine if you're like, Christmas? Nah, it's not for me. It's not part of my culture. It just doesn't do anything for me. Fine. Also, too, I think all of us should probably be a little bit leery about the commodification of so many of the trappings of Christmas. Like the decorations and the gifts, that stuff can be fun, but it should not be the overwhelming focus. It should not distract you from spending time with family, friends, loved ones, and with the general spirit of good cheer and generosity that are among the more admirable parts of Christmas. But beyond that, Christmas is obviously not BS, because it is capable of being almost anything you want it to be. And really, don't we all need that in the heart of winter? As the year reaches its darkest point, its coldest point, its most depressing point, can't we all benefit from a little bit of extra joy and good cheer in this particular season? So, to put it another way,
be excellent to each other. Party on, dudes!
So, have yourselves a happy solstice, Merry Christmas, groovy New Year, however you want to phrase it. Always check your sources and evidence. See you later.